Have you ever heard the sound of the desert when the wind stops? Not the ordinary silence, but the silence that seems to watch you back? This is a letter sealed for over 30 years, written by a soldier during the 1991 Gulf War. He never returned, and today you will hear his last words. The seal is still intact, the paper yellowed, and the ink almost gone. It was found inside a small metal box buried in Kuwait, next to a military tag corroded by sand. The first line reads, "The sand drew circles around us." But before we open this letter, imagine the scene. The Kuwaiti desert, February 1991. The heat was so intense that the air seemed to vibrate. Operation Desert Storm was already in full swing, and each gust of wind kicked up mountains of sand that changed the map with each dawn. Men slept in short shifts, breathing dust, listening to the radio crackle between garbled messages and whispered prayers. The tents moved in the wind, and the sandbags that were supposed to protect them seemed to never stay still. Many soldiers reported strange sensations, sounds coming from below, nocturnal vibrations, as if the ground were breathing. Some said the desert had memories, that it stored everything it saw, and returned it whenever it pleased. Now, faced with this letter, it's impossible not to wonder, what did he see before he disappeared? What made him write something so specific, so visual, so impossible to ignore? The envelope is here, in my hands, and when I open it, every word in it will travel through time, straight from 1991 to you. But before you read, there's something you need to understand about that night. And before we continue reading, I want to ask you something important. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story captivated you. Perhaps the mystery, perhaps the voice of this soldier that time has nearly erased. Every letter I read carries a fragment of the memory of someone who really existed. When you leave your comment, when you click like or subscribe to the channel, you're not just helping the video, you're helping keep these voices alive. This is how the algorithm understands that it's worth showing this story to more people, that it's worth giving visibility to something forgotten. So tell me in the comments, what do you think the soldier meant by "the sand drew circles around us"? Was it an omen, a natural phenomenon, or something no one has ever been able to explain? Press the like now, subscribe and ring the bell, because each new letter we find brings something even stranger, more human, more true. You'll want to be here when the next one opens. The wind had died down. The air felt heavy, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. On the surface of the sand, a small metal box, rusted and covered in a fine layer of dust, waited to be found. No detectors located it. No map indicated its presence. It was chance, or something many call coincidence, that led a sand sweeper decades later to notice a E glint among the grains of hardened sand. The lid was locked. Two cross-shaped marks indicated it had been tightly sealed, as if someone wanted to ensure the contents would never be opened, or would only be opened at the right moment. Inside, a yellowed envelope with brittle edges lay folded silently. In the top corner, a barely legible stamp, "Restricted." The word sounded heavy, as if it still held the authority of a military command. There was no name, no recipient, just a penciled date, February, date in 1991, and a set of geographic coordinates. The letters trembled, as if the hand that wrote them was in a hurry, or afraid. The envelope was sealed, but the desert humidity had left it almost glued together at the edges, requiring care. The sound of the paper coming loose is the kind of noise that sends shivers down your spine. A fragile sound, but one laden with history. The smell was the same as old documents stored for decades, a mixture of rust, ink, and time, an odor that betrays that this paper was present when the world was still a different place. And unlike so many legends circulating online, this letter exists. It has been cataloged, photographed, and remains in the custody of a private collector who prefers anonymity. He says he doesn't believe in coincidences, but he also avoids talking much about what happened after opening the envelope. The contents were a field letter, written in a faded blue ballpoint pen. The tone was personal, almost intimate. No indication of military rank, just the signature, M. The beginning was simple, straightforward, and seemed to start like any letter sent home from a soldier. But there was something strange. The recipient wasn't a person. The letter appeared to have been written for whoever found it. If you are reading this, it means the wind has changed sides. I don't know if the sun still rises where you are. Here, it looks the same every day, but the desert is never the same. The words seemed to echo on there. It was as if the author had foreseen that his voice would be heard long afterward, by someone far away, perhaps not even born at the time he wrote. This is how letters survive, as capsules of emotion and fear, suspended between what happened and what will never be explained. As the reader progressed, the writing became more irregular. The handwriting slanted to the right, with gaps in the lines typical of someone writing under stress or with a shaky hand. In one corner, a circular smudge, perhaps a drop of sweat, perhaps a tear. The paper bore these marks like silent wounds. The author described a sand field a few kilometers from the Saudi border. He spoke of the constant sound of the wind, of how the nights were too long, and sleep was accompanied by images no one wanted to dream. Sometimes, he wrote, the sand seems to breathe with me. He mentions fellow patrol members, but no full names, just initials. J still hears the bass's sound on the radio. C sleeps with his gun beside him, even inside the tent. I try to write, but the pencil sinks. There's a sense of waiting, of something approaching, even if no one knows what it is. The following excerpt is what most intrigued those who read the letter for the first time. Today, the wind didn't come. The desert fell silent. The sand began to draw on its own, making slow, perfect circles around us. That was the phrase that gave the story its name, the phrase that seemed to have crossed time like an echo-san. The sand drew circles around us, and it was at this point that the reading began to change in tone. The soldier seemed to realize something was wrong, but there was no panic in his words, just a kind of acceptance, an almost spiritual calm. War letters are usually filled with fear, longing, or farewell, but this one had silence as its main character, a silence that transformed into presence. It was the kind of calm that precedes something that cannot be explained. With each line, the viewer feels like they're participating in the discovery, as if they were right there with the narrator, opening the envelope with their own hands, feeling the weight of what's about to be revealed. Because there's a difference between hearing a story and to testify one, and at that moment everyone becomes a witness. The camera could zoom in on the handwriting, the details of the ink. The background sound should be subtle, the faint hiss of the returning wind, almost as if the letter were whispering from within the paper. If you find this, he wrote, don't look for me. The desert does not return what it keeps. This was the last line before the first pause in the reading. A silence descends. Not an empty silence, but one that weighs heavy as a memory. The audience needs to breathe along with the narrator. The story isn't just being told, it's being happening again in front of those who watch. And it is at this point that the reading will begin. The sound of the paper adjusting, the pent-up breathing, and the echo of the last words repeating in the listener's mind. The desert, the letter, time. Everything seems to align in a single instant. Now, the wind is about to return, and what this letter reveals in the next few lines will completely change the tone of the silence. The letter opens like an old wound, each line seeming to breathe with the wind. The narrator adjusts the paper between his fingers, trying not to tear what time has nearly destroyed. His voice is low, respectful, as if he's reading something he shouldn't. The first words are simple but laden with a kind of weight that only solitude can bestow. The desert has voices. Sometimes the wind whistles inside the tent. Today, he didn't come. The sound is almost a whisper. The audience feels the temperature drop, not in the room, but in the narrative's atmosphere. The desert, once a backdrop, begins to become a living presence. The narrator reads slowly, letting silence fill the spaces between sentences, as if each pause were a breath from the letter's author. The soldier describes his daily life. He speaks of boredom, the unbearable heat, the way the sand got into everything, his boots, his food, even his dreams. He writes as if he's speaking to someone who won't respond, and perhaps that's why every sentence feels like a confession. We wake up to the sound of generators and fall asleep to the buzzing of flies. Sometimes I think time has stopped here. The sun seems not to move. The camera, if there were one, would show the tent cloth moving slightly, pushed by an imaginary wind that night, according to the letter, didn't appear. It's a false calm, the kind of tranquility the body feels before an earthquake. The narrator's voice continues, and the viewer is carried away by the almost hypnotic rhythm. He reads the next excerpt. I don't know what's day or night anymore. I just know that when the wind stops, no one speaks. It seems that even the radio understands. There's a strange beauty in these words. The audience empathizes with this man isolated on a piece of land that didn't want him there. The descriptions are almost poetic, but written by someone who wasn't trying to write poetry. He just wanted to record what he saw so as not to go mad. Ambient sound in a video can be subtle, a touch of sand sliding, light footsteps, the sound of a radio knob being turned. These sensory details heighten immersion, making the viewer feel the heat, the isolation, the discomfort. At one point in the letter, the soldier writes, "There is something different about the sand. It changes color at dusk. Yesterday I swore I saw a glow, as if the moon were rising beneath it." This sentence is spoken with a pause. The narrator lets the silence linger. It's at this moment that the tension begins to build. It's not fear, yet, but the feeling that something is wrong. The audience instinctively knows that this calm is about to shatter. The text continues with banal details. Military rations, weapon cleaning routines, shift changes. It's the realism of these details that makes the account so believable. The soldier doesn't try to scare, doesn't seem to be making things up. He simply describes. This makes the viewer believe him. With each new line, the words gain weight. Writing helps me not forget who I was. When the wind blows, it feels like it takes pieces of me away. It's a kind of loneliness that isn't just physical, it's spiritual. The war was over for many, but there, in the middle of nowhere, there were men who still struggled with their own silence. The narrator pauses. The sound of the paper adjusting mingles with the hiss of the wind, which returns, faint, scratching the microphone. The camera zooms in on the text, the words shaky, the ink smeared. A dark smudge in the lower right corner. It could be dirt. It could be dried blood. The audience feels the urge to pause the video, zoom in, and try to understand. This is the power of realism. It makes the viewer become an investigator. The next paragraph is what changes the tone of the letter. The soldier writes as if he is beginning to realize that something out of the ordinary is happening. For 3 nights now, the wind has stopped completely. Not a single particle of sand moves. It's as if the desert holds the air. At this point, the soundtrack fades until it almost disappears. The narrator lets the ambient sound dominate. The hum of the microphone, the distant sound of metal clanging, perhaps an echo from nowhere. The audience hears nothing but feels the emptiness. When the wind stops, the voices return. They are not ours. They come from outside, as if the sand spoke to itself. From this point on, the letter's text begins to show minor flaws. Words are crossed out, sentences are incomplete. There's a sense of urgency, as if the author is writing too quickly, trying to capture everything before the wind picks up. J says it's the echo of the dunes. C thinks it's the radio. Interference. But I know. The sound comes from below. The audience feels the chill creeping in, even watching at home. It's the kind of narrative that activates the survival instinct. The desert, once a backdrop, is now something alive, pulsating, almost sentient. The narrator's voice becomes lower, almost a whisper. Today, the wind didn't come. The desert fell silent, and the silence looked back. This is the last line before the pause. The narrator slowly folds the letter. The sound of the paper echoes through the room, accompanied by a low, almost imperceptible note that seems to vibrate beneath the voice. The audience senses that something unseen is about to happen. The silence of the letter is now the silence of the spectator. And when the narrator looks up from the page, everyone is waiting for the same thing, for the calm to be broken. The wind, which until now was absent, will return, but not in the way they expect. Suddenly the wind stopped. It wasn't slow. It wasn't or. Little by little, He just stopped. The tent cloth, which had been constantly moving, remained still as a photograph. There was no sound, not the blare of the radio, not the sound of the soldiers breathing. It was as if the desert itself had held its breath, as if everything outside was waiting for something to happen. One of them, named Jay, looked to the side and whispered, "Are you guys listening to this?" But there was nothing to hear. And yet, everyone felt that something was there. The man who wrote the letter said the ground felt different. He said the desert came alive, that he could feel a kind of gentle vibration rising up through his feet, as if the sand were breathing. Then one of them opened the tent and looked outside. What he saw was something none of them forgot. The sand was moving, on its own, very slowly, forming a perfect pattern on the floor. A circle, then another, and another. 3 circles around the camp, as if someone invisible was drawing around them with a giant ruler. No wind, no explanation, just the circles, growing. The men stood still. No one wanted to step outside the tent. It seemed that if anyone crossed that line of sand, something very bad could happen. One of them even tried to throw a handful of sand out to see if it was an illusion, but the grains fell and returned to their place. They returned alone. The author of the letter wrote, "It's not the wind. I know it's not." And it was at that moment that the fear really began. They heard a soft sound, almost like a whisper, a sound coming from the ground, a sound that seemed to speak, but no one could understand what it was saying. The base's lights began to flicker. The radio turned on and off by itself, as if something were moving it. And in the midst of it all, the innermost circle began to glow, very faintly, like the reflection of the moon, but with no moon in the sky. The soldier who wrote the letter said it was both beautiful and frightening. It seemed like a living thing, but calm. A slow, almost polite movement, as if the desert were showing something. Teaching, perhaps. He wrote, "The desert wasn't trying to hurt us. It just wanted us to see." Still, no one moved. The silence was so intense, you could hear your own heartbeat. One of the soldiers cried without realizing it. Another trembled, his gun in his hands, but he didn't know where to aim it. The sand stopped. For a moment, everything was normal again. But the author wrote, "We were afraid the circles would come back because it felt like they were looking at us." After that, he said he felt a chill run down his back, as if something had passed over him, light, almost invisible. And the wind returned, but not the same wind. It was cold, icy, a wind that seemed to come from within the earth. He ended this part of the letter with a phrase that still gives me goosebumps today. "The wind has returned, but now it knows our names." And that's where the silence of history changes. Because from that moment on, the desert stops being just a place. He becomes something alive, something that observes, something that never forgets whoever saw it move. After that night, nothing seemed normal anymore. The men tried to pretend that everything was fine, but their silence betrayed their fear. The letter said that no one talked about the circles, not a word, as if everyone had agreed, without needing to agree, to forget what they saw. But their bodies remembered. Every time the wind stopped, even for a second, someone held their breath. Their eyes met and no one needed to ask anything. You could see the panic on everyone's face. The soldier who wrote the letter reported that the next morning the circles were still there. Perfect, clear, intact. And the strangest thing, the sand inside them was different, finer, smoother, as if it had been sifted 1,000 times. They took photos. They took measurements. One of them tried to write it all down in a notebook, but when they went to see at or night, the photos were gone. The film reel was empty. The notes? They disappeared from the notebook as if they had never been written. The author wrote, "I don't know what's worse, what we saw or the feeling that someone doesn't want us to remember it." And that's when the doubt began. One of the men said it was just the heat, that the heat could deceive the eyes. Another swore he had seen the sand move by itself, and that he had heard a sound, like a muffled voice from within the earth. No one agreed with anyone else, but everyone felt the same thing. The desert knew they were there. Over the next few weeks, small things started to happen, too small to seem important. but strange enough that no one could ignore them. A canteen moved by itself during the night. The radios turned on even without batteries, and sometimes before they went to sleep, they would hear footsteps outside, slow footsteps, that stopped near the tent and then disappeared without a trace. One of them, C, started to look different. I couldn't sleep anymore. He spoke softly, afraid that the wind would hear. One day he said, "Those circles weren't a warning. They were a boundary, and no one knew what he meant by that." The author of the letter tried to record everything, but the pen kept failing. He noted, "The desert is listening. When I talk about him, the wind changes." This phrase was repeated several times on the following pages, as if he wanted to warn, but at the same time was afraid to finish. The sentence, "What's scariest about a story like this isn't what appears. That's what no one can explain." And they all started to realize this. The circles disappeared after a few days, but the people who were there swear they could feel them even without seeing them. It was as if the air had an invisible edge, a kind of forbidden line that the body recognized without needing to look. And the strangest thing is that, in the official reports from the base, that night never existed. There are no records, no audio, no notes, nothing, as if time had been erased. The soldier ended this part of the letter by saying, "If someone ever finds this, they'll think it's crazy, but it isn't. Only those who have heard the silence of the desert understand what it does to the mind." After this sentence there is a line, as if the pen had been pulled out abruptly. The rest of the page was blank, and it is at this point in the story that fear turns into doubt. Not just any doubt, but one that sticks in your head and won't go away. Did that really happen? Or was the desert just returning what they brought inside? Fear? Guilt? Loneliness? The letter does not respond. She just ends this passage with one last line written in the corner, almost erased. "The wind knows more than we do." A few months after the war ended, similar reports began to appear from other parts of the desert. Nothing very clear, no video, no recording, just stories, reports from soldiers, travelers, and even locals who claimed to have seen the sand moving by itself, forming perfect circles always at night, always when the wind stopped. The most curious thing is that these reports were all in the same region, near the coordinates that were written on the letter. This made many people believe that the soldier was not hallucinating, nor imagining anything. Maybe he had actually seen something that no one else knew how to explain. Years later, a researcher found a small diary from another American soldier. The diary was kept in a forgotten archive in a decommissioned military base. On one of the pages there was a sentence that made many people shiver. The wind stopped, the sand breathed, and for a moment, I swore I heard the ground whisper. It was almost the same description as the letter you just heard. Same details, same feeling, same kind of silence. But the strangest thing was the recording of a geologist who was studying desert sounds. Yes, sounds. There is a real phenomenon called booming sand, or singing sand. In certain parts of the world, sand can make sounds when the wind changes, or when heat makes the dunes vibrate. The noise is so low and so mysterious that many people believe it comes from underground. And that's where things get even more interesting. The phenomenon is real, but the way it appears, it's never the same. Some recordings show sounds, others subtle movements in the sand, as if the soil were alive. But what no one explains is why, in 1991, the circles were formed exactly around a group of soldiers. The narrator of the letter, or whoever found the document, talks about it carefully. He says there are times when the desert responds, that when you spend too much time there, alone, in silence, it seems like he starts to understand you, as if the desert had consciousness. An expert who analyzed the letter paper years later said that the handwriting changes after the circles section. In the beginning, the letters are firm, organized. Then, the lines become tilted, shaky, as if the person were writing quickly, looking around, afraid of something around. But there is no spelling error. There is no mental confusion. This shows that the author was lucid, even in the face of fear. The letter was studied under ultraviolet light. And do you know what they discovered? Pencil lines that have been erased, words hidden under the ones we read today. Among them, a curious, almost poetic phrase, "The sand listens." This sentence was written 3 times, and it was carefully erased, as if the author had regretted leaving it visible. But there is something even stranger. On the back of the paper, scholars found a faint, almost imperceptible circular mark made by pressure, as if someone had placed something round on the letter before putting it away. Some say it was the bottom of a glass. Others believe it was left by the sand itself, when the wind returned and touched the envelope already buried. Coincidence? Maybe. But the shape of the circle is identical to the circles described in the letter. And here comes the detail that really takes your breath away. A weather map from the time, archived in 1991, shows light seismic vibrations recorded in exactly the same area, and on the same night as the letter was dated. Nothing strong enough to cause an earthquake, but strong enough to move the surface of the sand. Officially, it was called a local wind anomaly, but the report ends with a curious handwritten note. Continuous noise detected. No source identified. And that's where the letter and science meet, right on the line where the real and the inexplicable mingle. When the narrator tells this, the voice should be a little lower, almost in a confessional tone. The phenomenon can even be explained, but what nobody explains is because it happened there, and because that soldier was the only one to write about it. The audience at this point isn't just curious, they're engaged. The question now is no longer if it happened, but why? With him? And the final part of this part of the letter has a strange force, a kind of phrase that gives you goosebumps, not because of fear, but because of certainty. The sand drew because someone was looking. Perhaps he meant that the desert responds to those who observe it. Maybe it was just a way of dealing with fear, but anyone who has been silent for too long knows silence responds, and sometimes it doesn't like to be interrupted. The letter begins to change tone. You can feel it just by the way he writes. The sentences become shorter, more direct, as if the author were in a hurry, as if he knew time was running out. The paper in the last lines has spots of a different color. No one knows if it's sweat, blood, or wet sand. But it's the kind of mark that makes us remember that this letter was written by someone in truth, scared, tired, and alone in the middle of the desert. He writes, "The sand is drawing again. We are not alone." The narrator's voice should be almost a whisper at this point. It's the kind of phrase that doesn't need to be explained, just felt. The viewer notices the silence, the weight, the shiver. "If I don't come back, the letter is yours now." These are the words that close the text. Simple, direct, real. And that's precisely why they hurt so much. Imagine what it's like to be there, not knowing if the sun will rise, listening to the sand move on its own, and feeling the wind itself watching you. It's not just fear, it's something deeper. It's the kind of solitude that turns silence into company. The author no longer speaks of war. He doesn't talk about orders nor about enemies. He speaks of something much bigger, of something that seems alive but has no face. The desert is now the main character. He writes as if he were talking to an invisible force, asking to be remembered, to not disappear completely. The sound coming from below is louder. The sand spins faster. "She calls me by name." The reader may not believe it, but the words are spoken so calmly that it seems impossible that they are made up. There is no panic. There is no screaming. There is acceptance. A kind of peace that only appears when someone understands that there is nowhere left to run. After that, the text is full of tears. The lines look scratched. The letters lose their shape. And among these marks, there is a last sentence, written crookedly, almost illegible. "The light is coming from under the sand." After that, nothing more. The rest of the letter is just silence. A silence printed on paper, which time has not been able to erase. Whoever found the document said that when they touched it, they felt a slight vibration. It could be a coincidence. It might just be emotion. But there's something about those last words that makes the air feel different. The narrator closes the letter slowly. The sound of the paper returning to the envelope is the same sound you hear when someone closes a book, knowing they won't open it again. And then comes the most beautiful and saddest moment. He says, I don't know his name, but he entrusted this story to whoever found it. And now, she's ours. The public feels it, because it's not just an old letter. It's a piece of someone's soul lost in time. It is a voice that crossed the desert and arrived here, almost 35 years later. Deep down, everyone understands what this letter really is. It's not just a story. It's a request so that no one forgets. And while the narrator keeps the letter, the wind returns, but not the common wind. It's a soft sound, as if the desert is breathing again, maybe in peace, maybe just waiting to be heard again. The sound stays for a few seconds. No music, no speech, just the wind. And the public understands. Silence also speaks. No one knows for sure how this letter survived. The envelope was crumpled, the ink was almost gone, and the paper had burn marks around the edges, as if it had been through fire but not destroyed. It was found many years later, inside an old ammunition box, buried half a meter below the surface, near an area where a small military camp had previously stood. The most curious thing is that that camp was not included in any official records. No map, no report. It was as if he had never existed. A man working on an archaeological dig was the one who found the box. He said the metal was so hot, even under the cold sand, that he had to wear gloves to touch it. And inside it, along with the letter, was a uniform button, a torn photograph, and a blue pen. The same color as the ink used to write what you heard. When the letter was delivered to the authorities, no one wanted to take responsibility for it. The army said the serial number on the box did not match any known batch. Experts who analyzed the material said the type of paper was actually used in military correspondence from 1991, i.e., the letter is real. But what about the soldier? Who was he? The name never appeared. No missing person records. No identification that matched the initials signed at the bottom of the letter. And the strangest thing, the date written was the last official day of Operation Desert Storm. After that night, all fighting ceased. It was the end of the war. So why did he write, "If I don't come back"? The man who found the letter swore he felt something strange when he opened the envelope. He said the air felt heavier, and the smell of the paper was like a storm coming, a smell of wet sand and iron. He kept the envelope in a small wooden box, away from light, and told the story only once, in a short interview recorded in a low, almost emotionless voice. He said that every time he tried to reread the text, the wind changed direction. Other people tried to investigate. A group of military document collectors managed to track down the exact location where the letter was found. But when they got there, the land was gone. The desert had completely changed. Where the camp had stood, there was now a giant dune, tall enough to cover a 2-story building, as if the desert had erased any sign that anyone had ever lived there. The narrator says that the letter was later sent to a small local museum, but was never displayed. It remains stored to this day, in a windowless room wrapped in plastic, inside a box labeled only with the word, unknown, unknown. And it's impossible not to think about what that means. How many similar stories could have been lost, swallowed by sand, by time, by silence? How? Many voices still sleep beneath the dunes, waiting for someone to hear them. The sound of the wind returns in this part of the narration, but now it sounds different, softer, slower, like a whisper of remembrance. The narrator takes a deep breath and says, "No soldier with the same name was listed as dead. No body was found. No clue. Just the letter." And the silence returns. A silence full of questions. The kind of silence that seems to stare at you, waiting for you to draw your own conclusions. The imaginary camera closes in on the yellowed envelope, resting under the dim light of a lamp. The ancient seal, the shaky handwriting, the almost faded date. Everything there is real. But what does she tell? Or what does she guard? No one is sure. The desert never gives back what it decides to keep. But sometimes he gives back stories. And the sound of the wind grows slowly, covering the screen, as if the desert was listening to what was said. Time has passed, but the wind still blows. And, somehow it seems like it carries more than dust. It carries memories, echoes, voices that the desert never wanted to erase. The letter was kept hidden, and no one has tried to open it since. But every time someone talks about it, something curious happens. The wind changes direction. It's as if the desert listens, as if he was still paying attention. Maybe the soldier never really disappeared. Maybe he just became part of what had always watched him. Part of the sand, the sound, the night. Part of the mystery that time does not explain. And if you've made it this far, maybe you feel the same way I do. That feeling that certain stories aren't just told. They choose who will hear them. And when that happens, it's impossible to forget them. What would you do if you found a letter like this? Would you open it, or let the desert keep the secret? Write in the comments what you think the soldier saw that night. And if this story kept you hooked until the end, leave a like. That's how I know you heard the wind too. And before you go, don't stop here. There's another story waiting for you. Click on the video below. Because every letter, every voice, every mystery is a new chance to hear the past whisper once more. The wind continues. And maybe, just maybe, he's still drawing circles around us.